Hello and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you some reading from Philosophical Foundations for a Christian Worldview. This is a book by J.P. Moreland and William Lane Craig, second edition. If you've ever wondered how philosophy or culture impacts the way people view the world, the way that they live their life, the decisions that they make, and how as a Christian we can develop that understanding and learn and grow, then I think you'll find this Friday video series pretty helpful. My name is Meli. I'm a lifelong Christian. I'm also a licensed therapist. And I guess today I'll add, I'm also a PK, preacher's kid. Grew up in the church literally my whole life, and I'm very, very thankful for that. And over the last several months, I've really have felt, or maybe even longer, a huge draw or call to learn more about philosophy. I've watched people like William Lane Craig on YouTube, among others, and there's just something so interesting about learning and understanding worldviews and just additional things that influence our culture so that we can be well-rounded and have influence on our world today, which I think is super important. Even though I do have a master's in mental health counseling, philosophy is not something that I have studied at all whatsoever. So this Friday series, what I wanted to do, since this book is massive and I've been wanting to read it, I thought it'd be nice to literally come on every Friday, set a 15-minute timer, read and do some commentary as I read, and then you guys can leave comments and let me know what you think. Give me some education, some wisdom, some correction, because I don't really know much about philosophy. Again, I'm literally going to set a 15-minute timer. Also, if you want to read along, I will leave a link to this book that you can buy from Amazon or maybe another resource like christianbook.com, just to give Christian organizations our financial support as well. All right, so this page that I'm starting with does not have a number, but at the very top it says an invitation to Christian philosophy. And if I mispronounce something, I will blame it on being an English as a second language person. And so let's leave it at that. 1. Why philosophy matters. On a clear autumn day in 1980, 25 miles west of Chicago in Wheaton, Illinois, Charles Malik, a distinguished academic and statesman, rose to the podium to deliver the inaugural address at the dedication of the new Billy Graham Center on the campus of Wheaton College. Actually, I had not heard of Wheaton College until somewhat recently, even though I grew up in a Christian household. My sisters and I, encouraged to go to our local universities. So I do know that Wheaton College, or I guess now it's Wheaton University, right, is a very esteemed Christian university. Anyway, back to Billy Graham. His announced topic was, quote, the two tasks of evangelism. What he said must have shocked his audience. We face two tasks in our evangelism, he told them. Saving the soul and saving the mind. And obviously, as a mental health counselor, Christian counselor, to me, that whole idea of saving the mind, the mindset, the soul and the mind is so important. So this really speaks to me. How about you? Okay, continuing to read. That is converting people not only spiritually, but intellectually as well. And the church, he warned, is lagging dangerously behind with respect to the second task. We should do well to ponder Malik's words. Okay, now there's a super long quote. I must be frank with you. The greatest danger confronting American evangelical Christianity is the danger of anti-intellectualism. The mind, in its greatest and deepest reaches, is not cared for enough. But intellectual nurture cannot take place apart from profound immersion for a period of years in the history of thought and the spirit. People who are in a hurry to get out of the university and start earning money or serving the church or preaching the gospel have no idea of the infinite value of spending years of leisure conversing with the greatest minds and souls of the past, ripening and sharpening and enlarging their powers of thinking. The result is that the arena of creative thinking is vacated and abdicated to the enemy. Who among evangelicals can stand up to the greatest secular scholars on their own terms of scholarship? Who among evangelical scholars is quoted as a normative source by the greatest secular authorities on history or philosophy or psychology or sociology or politics? Does the evangelical mode of thinking have the slightest chance of becoming the dominant mode in the great universities of Europe and America that stamp our entire civilization with their spirit and ideas? For the sake of greater effectiveness in witnessing to Jesus Christ, as well as for their own sake, evangelicals cannot afford to keep on living on the periphery of responsible intellectual existence. Wow. Okay, just a little comment there. I actually read this before, and it just made me think so much of so many different things between apologetics, being able as a Christian to answer difficult questions that people will often ask. I know I was often challenged my entire life being a PK with questions that I didn't know how to answer, and with time I think I've gotten hopefully a little bit better at that, but I still have those moments of uncertainty, and I know that that's definitely an area of growth for me. But even here, talking about the intellectuals in our universities, which, as we know in today's age, right, in 2024, has become so secular. And I wonder if part of that is our desire as Christians to kind of be in a vacuum. I know that I homeschool my kids, and part of it is because they're young and they're impressionable, and I don't necessarily want the influence of such a secular society on their young and impressionable minds. And I also see the fruit of homeschooling and the heightened levels of intellectual capacity that comes with that. These words hit like a hammer. The average Christian does not realize that there is an intellectual struggle going on in the universities and scholarly journals and professional societies. Enlightenment, naturalism, and postmodern anti-realism are arrayed in an unholy alliance against a broadly theistic and specifically Christian worldview. And I kind of starred that because these are terms that I hear often that really impact our society today, and it's something that I would like to learn more about. But I do believe this book goes into, for example, postmodernism, enlightenment, naturalism, anti-realism. You see that so much today. I used to love NSYNC when I was in middle and high school, and Justin Timberlake, and the whole thing. And recently I saw him being interviewed, and he was talking about how there's like no reality. Everyone's reality is valid. And as Christians, we don't believe those kinds of things, but that's where this comes from. It's from philosophy that shapes people's worldview in the culture, especially in media. And it's important that we equip our kids to be aware of and to be able to catch those comments and challenge them, and not just mindlessly hear them and then receive them and perceive them as truth, because that's where confusion stirs. And again, I allow my kids to watch secular TV shows, and I'll sit there with them, ask them questions. If I notice themes that are coming up related to some of this, pause it, and instead of preaching, it's more so asking questions. Like, okay, this person said there's no such thing as reality. What do you think about that? What do you think God says about that? What can you think of any Bible verses? And then I'll just, interject here and there, kind of like putting a flashlight on the truth and not just preaching it directly at them always, making it a more engaging conversation. Christians cannot afford to be indifferent to the outcome of this struggle, for the single most important institution shaping Western culture is the university. It is at the university that our future political leaders, journalists, teachers, business executives, lawyers, and artists will be trained. So pause here for a little commentary. I'm wondering if this is still going to be true, because I watch people like Dave Ramsey, who's a Christian financial influencer or businessman, and he specifically very much believes in the university system. But I remember, was it Ken Coleman, who's one of the personalities in his organization, and he talks about careers and career ambition and kind of like this changing perspective, especially with how expensive tuition has gotten over the years. People are not seeing the return on investment from going to university, putting off working for 4 to 6 years if you're like me and get a master's, even longer if you're getting a doctorate. So they're just not seeing that return on investment, graduating oftentimes with student loans, lots of debt, also being, brainwashed and indoctrinated on one particular worldview for the most part. People just aren't, it seems, valuing it as much as they used to. Reading again, it is at the university that they will formulate, or more likely simply absorb, the worldview that will shape their lives. And since these are the opinion makers and leaders who shape our culture, the worldview they imbibe at the university will be one that shapes our culture. If the Christian worldview can be restored to a place of prominence and respect at the university, it will have a leavening effect throughout society. That, of course, I do believe to be true. God's word is alive and active, and it'll pierce through the hearts of all who hear it, I believe. If we change the university, we change our culture through those who shape culture. And this, I do believe to be true, and it's important for Christians to work at universities. And I do believe especially secular ones, because oftentimes, I know I'm guilty of this too, wanting to only work in ministry, wanting to only work in that bubble, but we're called to be in the world and not of it. And so if we retract ourselves so much, I think like we have been over the past 20 years, if not longer, then the fruit of that is what we see in American culture and society today. It's just rapidly sort of degenerating away from traditional Judeo-Christian values. Why is this important? Simply because the gospel is never heard in isolation. It is always heard against the background of the cultural milieu in which one lives. A person raised in a cultural milieu in which Christianity is still seen as an intellectually viable option will display an openness to the gospel that a person who is secularized will not. One may as well tell a secular person to believe in fairies or leprechauns as in Jesus Christ. Or to give a more realistic illustration, it is like our being approached on the street by a devotee of the Hare Krishna movement who invites us to believe in Krishna. Such invitation strikes us as bizarre, freakish, perhaps even amusing. But to a person on the streets of Mumbai, such an invitation would, one expects, appear quite reasonable and be serious cause for reflection. Do evangelicals appear any less weird to persons on the streets of Bonn, London, or New York than the devotees of Krishna? One of the awesome tasks of Christian philosophers is to help turn the contemporary intellectual tide in such a way as to foster a socio-cultural milieu in which Christian faith can be regarded as an intellectually credible option for thinking men and women. As the great Princeton theologian J. Gresham Machen explained, quote, God usually exerts his regenerative power in connection with certain prior conditions of the human mind, and it should be ours to create, so far as we can, with the help of God, those favorable conditions for the reception of the gospel. False ideas are the greatest obstacles to the reception of the gospel. We may preach with all the fervor of a reformer and yet succeed only in winning a straggler here and there. If we permit the whole collective thought of the nation or of the world to be controlled by ideas which, resistless force of logic, prevent Christianity from being regarded as anything more than a harmless delusion. And I definitely see this a lot when it's basically talking about how, comparing believing in Krishna and believing in Jesus Christ both may seem just as unintellectually stimulating to some people. I can see that already in our society. I have seen that growing up as a PK in public school in the, technically in the 90s. I think I started kindergarten in 1989, graduated high school in 2003. I've seen this. Also having gone to a secular university in the state of Florida, which is free, and oftentimes people see it as a very maybe Christian, maybe state, but that's not necessarily the case for every person, right? So I can definitely see this, and that's why this book and the idea of really expanding my understanding of philosophy and our culture, and how a lot of these thoughts and ideals really permeate in not only media, but even in the church today, being able to identify it and know exactly how to facilitate an intellectual conversation, not only with highly intellectual people, but even with just everyday people as well, I think is going to be a very important calling as we move forward and closer to the time of Christ's return. I'm actually going to end there. Let me know if you want me to change up how I present this information. Do you like the commentary? Do you not like the commentary? Is it better for me to just read through it? I know I do have an accent, but sometimes that can be kind of different and entertaining to hear someone with a different accent. So let me know your thoughts in the comments, and next Friday I will read another 15 minutes.